Hey guys, it's Bree. So today's video is going to be on my tips for starting out with cloth pads. So I've actually already made a video on this, but it was well over a year ago now, and I feel like maybe I know a little bit more now and I can give you a few more tips, but also I get this question so often. It's come to the point now where I've really just had to say, look, I can't reply to emails and messages about this because otherwise I'd be spending my entire day replying to messages. So I figured if I made an updated video on this, maybe you guys would get some extra tips on how to start using cloth pads, because it's really not that difficult, but it can seem kind of daunting with all the different fabrics and styles and you name it. There's a lot of variety with cloth pads, so hopefully these tips should help you out. So tip number one is decide whether you are the kind of person who just wants to try out cloth pads, has been interested in the idea of them, thinks they sound kind of cool, but you're really not sure and you're not sure whether you want to invest all your money into them, or are you the kind of person who has found out about cloth pads and thinks, oh my god, that sounds like amazing, I hate disposable pads, I really want to use cloth pads, I don't want to use disposable pads again. Because that will decide really how many pads you want to buy the first time. So I would recommend, if you're the kind of person who is just interested in the idea and you maybe just want to trial them, so like a trial set, you might just want to get one panty liner, one regular flow pad, possibly one heavy flow pad if you have a heavy period as well, and one overnight pad. That way you can try out all the different styles and determine whether you like them or not, and you get a full sense of, you know, the different variety that you get with cloth pads. Or you might want to have enough cloth pads to get you through just one day, so you could have a one-day trial of cloth pads. For that, I would recommend you probably want to get, again, one panty liner, but 3 regular pads or 3 heavy pads. Again, it depends on whether you think you have a heavy flow or a regular flow. You can kind of tell based on how often you have to change your pad. You'll just have an instinctive idea of whether you're really heavy or you're quite light or you're quite regular. And then obviously one overnight pads that you can wear for over that night. This is also quite good because then if you do like the cloth pads, you can just wear disposables the next day while you're washing those pads, and then you can put them through a tumble dryer or leave them on the radiator and they'll be dry for the day after, so you can kind of alternate between the cloth pads, and then for your next cycle you can get more in, obviously. And if you're the kind of person who really wants to switch, then I would recommend you have about 3 panty liners. Panty liners are more useful for when you are spotting at the beginning or at the end of your period, or they can also be really good for cut back up if you're using a menstrual cup. If you want to know more about using a menstrual cup, then you probably want to look at my video on how to choose your first menstrual cup, because that's all it takes to use a menstrual cup. You only need 1 cup, obviously. But you probably want to have about 5 or 6, maybe 7 regular to heavy flow pads. Again, it depends on your particular flow. If you think you're heavy, get some more heavy pads. If you think you're more regular or lighter, get some more regular flow pads. You'll see that some pad brands offer light flow pads. They're not really essential for when you're starting out with cloth pads, because you can always just use a regular flow pad on your lighter day and not bleed in it as much. But when you start getting more into cloth pads, that's when you can start looking at light flow pads more. If you have a really, really light flow though, then you can probably use some of the light flow pads instead of regular flow pads. But I would recommend about 6 or 7 regular flow pads to be comfortable, and then 2 overnight pads. This is enough for you to get through your cycle if you were to wash every single day, and then you can kind of gradually build up over time, which is always a good thing because cloth pads can be quite expensive when you start out. One of the accessories you probably also want to get when you're using cloth pads is a wet bag. Now I have a kind of a big square wet bag that just has 2 zips, so I have 1 zip for my dry stuff, so if I have clean pads I put them in there, and then I have a zip that has PUL lined in it, which is where I put which is the waterproof fabric, which is where I put all my soiled pads in. So that's like a double-sided wet bag, and it's called a travel wet bag as well. That's the one I sell on my website, links down below. That's the one I really like, not just because it's on my website, but because I picked it because I like using it. I do also have a square one, which is kind of in my bucket over there, I can see. It's literally just a square. Hang on, I'll grab it for you. Here it is. It's literally just a square. It has a popper here and you can flip the top over it. It's like a giant pad wrapper. If you don't know what that is, it's not essential. It's just a little wrapper that you can wrap a soiled cloth pad in. Again, it's not an essential piece of kit for starting out. It looks like this. This is by Popolini. I haven't been able to find this wet bag since I first bought it. The website doesn't sell it anymore, so I'm not really sure you can get this now. But this is what it looks like, and it's just a simple wet bag, and I just put all my soil pads in that. You might also want to get a travel size wet bag. Again, they'll be really easily advertised and they're often on the same site so you can buy cloth pads from. So when it comes to choosing cloth pads, I would first of all take a disposable pad if you're already using disposable pads. Some people haven't started their period yet and want to get a few. In that case, if you started your period, I would go for the trial set. So maybe get a panty liner, a regular flow pad. The average length for a regular flow pad is around 10 inches. Average length for a panty liner is around 6 to 7 inches. The average length for a heavy flow pad can either be the same as a regular flow, 10 inches, or it can go to 11 inches. And then an overnight pad is usually between 12 and 13 inches. Again, they can be bigger or smaller depending on what you like. But take a disposable pad if you are using pads already and measure the length of it and see what length it is that you like, because that will give you an idea of what you want with your cloth pads. They're pretty much the same lengths that I liked, that I found work the most with people who like a particular length in a disposable pad. They tend to like the same length in a cloth pad. Then you get onto fabrics, and this is where people tend to get really confused. So I've got the 3 main fabrics here. This is cotton, this is Minke, and this is OBV or organic bamboo velour. Cotton is probably without doubt the most readily available, so I would definitely recommend you get a couple of cotton pads in your stashes. Cotton is really good for hot climates because it's really, really breathable, and it keeps pads quite thin as well because it's a very thin fabric. I like it. It does tend to be a little bit of a problem with staining. If you get darker colours though, that's not an issue I've found, but it does like to stain cotton. But I love it because it's breathable. It doesn't take too long to dry, but it's also not super quick drying, unlike some fabrics. But it's definitely one of those ones you want to have in this stash when you start out, and that's just plain cotton or just a cotton top. OBV is oh no, actually not OBV, let's go with Minke. Minke is probably the next one. Minke is a super, super soft. If you've ever felt those baby blankets that feel really soft, it's the same sort of material as those. This is Minke. And as you can see here, I've got a number of different shapes in the cloth pads. These are just ones I happened to grab out of my cupboard. This is 10 inches and this is 12 inches. I have this for when I'm in bed and I'm just like not doing anything. I just want to muck around in my bed. But anyway, on the top fabric, this is Minke, and as I said before, Minke is really, really soft. The downsides to Minke are that Minke can be quite hot. So if you are someone who lives in a hot climate, or if you just don't like getting a sweaty feeling in your underwear, Minke is probably not the best one for you, but you might want to try a one pad in it because some people really love it and some people hate it. It's like Marmite. And the last one is OBV. Now, I used to be a big fan of OBV, not quite such a big fan now, but I still really like it. OBV is organic bamboo velour, so it's a more organic top fabric. OBV is also a really absorbent fabric, so it absorbs stuff really well, and it's also a quick absorbing fabric. Bamboo tends to be a very fast absorbing fabric. The downside to OBV is it takes a long time to dry because bamboo absorbs a lot, but it takes a while to dry. It also can't withstand very high temperatures, so you've got to wash it at kind of 30, 40 degrees max really with this type of fabric. But it also tends to come in these beautiful hand-dyed colorways, so if you can get your hands on one, this is great. This is by a company called Dinky Dot Spots Secrets. She sells on Facebook. This is by a company called Creations by 5. Here are the wings. She sells on Etsy. Etsy is a very popular site for getting cloth pads, and this is Two Piece Creations. She also sells on Etsy. It's just a case really of maybe getting a range, one of each perhaps, or getting a couple of one style, figuring out what you like, and then you can go on and buy more. As you can see here, there are many different shapes. Again, you can figure this out from disposables a lot of the time. Often petite women tend to prefer more straight cut ones rather than big flared ones like this that flare out here, but that's not always the case, so you'll definitely need to try them out just to see what you particularly like. Although cloth pads might not be the perfect cloth pad for you, and you might think, I'd really prefer if this was, you know, straight cut rather than flared, they will almost certainly work. And there are some trading groups on Facebook where if you try a cloth pad at once and you don't like it, you can trade it with someone else who has a cloth pad that maybe would suit better for you. So this is a pretty standard shape, I would say, a gentle flare out here and here. So this is the kind of pad that would work for the majority of people. You might find after trying this pad that you would prefer to have some pads with a bit more of a flare, or you might find you want some pads with a bit less of a flare, but this is a good one because it's a kind of compromise in between the two, so it'll work for you, but it's also more likely to be able to give you a good idea of what would work even better for you and what would not work quite so well for you. And that's a really good and important thing to learn when you start out with cloth pads, because they will almost certainly work. You know, you're putting something in your underwear to absorb the blood, they're going to work. And as I said, I have routines for washing up here, all the videos explaining how to do that, but I hope this just gave you a couple of tips on things, you know, to look out for when you're starting out with cloth pads. Just buying a few maybe to start out with so you get an idea of the sort of shape that you like, the fabric you like. Don't worry too much about what's in the core and the absorbency. That's the sort of thing that you need to leave down to the experts if you're completely new, because we do know what we're doing when we come to this sort of thing. When it comes to cost, this really can vary. I'm in the UK, so everything I buy is in British pounds, but I would usually expect to spend around £4 on a panty liner, around £5 to £6 on a regular flow pad, £6 to £7 on a heavy flow pad, and around, it could really vary for the overnights depending on what size, because I quite like a long pad because I tend to bleed in the centre and then drip right to the back. I like to have 14.5 inches, and that can be pretty expensive. So that can be anything between around £8 and £13. But that's the sort of price I would spend on an overnight pad, as I don't need that many. I usually use a cup overnight. So I hope that gave you some ideas, guys. Thanks for watching. Check out the links below. Please subscribe, and I will talk to you later. Bye.